When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake through some of our very mutual friends.
He had already graduated and was planning to move across the country for his upcoming graduate school program.
I had already been making plans to move with friends only 90 minutes away from his new location.
We had so much in common, fell in love, and it really seemed like fate was guiding us.
Both planning to move 3,000 miles and landing so close together felt like a very beautiful coincidence.
He had two sisters and a younger brother who were all awesome people, and I became instant friends.
Because he was in school and I was working, I would usually go to him on the weekends. He was renting a house with two roommates who were also enrolled in the same academic graduate program. We were young, so money was tight, but we had fun going out on various taco date nights.
We spent a lot of time at his house where he was breeding and selling several small animals.
Jake was an animal sciences PhD student, and so being around animals was normal, and I truly loved it.
I met and became friends with his advisor's wife, Mary, who worked in administration at the local university.
Yeah, totally. She is a lovely woman, and I would often have lunch with her when I visited him often. Yeah.
Jake was a teaching assistant, and I met other people in the program and made friends quickly.
After about 2 years of dating, I was at the house one day, laying in bed together. He said out of the blue he was concerned I had been gaining weight lately for his attraction.
No concern about my health, it was all about him finding me unattractive in his own personal view.
I sat up and said, well, then maybe you should make sure there is better food available.
You should provide more than crackers and cheese when I come up to visit on the weekends.
Even at 23, I did not take that kind of nonsense from anyone in my life.
I had gained maybe 10 pounds since meeting him and still wore the same size of clothes.
I was about a US size 6 to 8, and I was not going to fight it.
It was his problem and not mine, and so I asked him calmly, "What is your actual solution?"
He stared at me blankly and said, "Well, I guess that you should try to lose weight."
And I said, nah, I am not going to do that. So what are you doing now?
He said, "Well, I guess nothing. I just wanted to let you know exactly how I feel."
I said, "Cool, thank you," and put my clothes back on and went to sleep for the night. I drove home the next day as usual, and we kept dating for a few more months.
About 3 months later, he called me and said he wanted to break up after 3 years.
The reason he gave was that I did not know enough about the field of biological science.
He felt like he could not have a conversation where he did not use common animal names.
I said, well, that is nonsense, so tell me, what is the real reason for this breakup?
He insisted it was the real reason, and then came to see me a month later to return.
I confronted him demanding the real reason, and he finally admitted he had been seeing a student.
Let us call her Meg, a 19-year-old student, while he was 26 and teacher.
I screamed at him to leave my house immediately, and my roommate threatened to throw him off.
My roommate threatened to throw him off the second-floor balcony if he did not go now.
It hit me all at once after he walked out, and I went from rage to laughter.
I had met Meg a few times, and once she spilled something on her pants at BBQ.
Jake asked me if I could loan her some sweats, but I could not do that because I was a size 8 and she was a size 18, which made it completely impossible then.
Nothing wrong with that, but I realized he made those weight comments to get me to leave.
He was a coward who clearly liked a bigger girl but tried to gaslight me instead then. When he said those things about my weight, it was 1 a.m. and 90 miles away. I do not know how he thought this would go, and even in hindsight, it still perplexes.
Did he think I was gonna break up and storm off into the dark, rainy night?
Anyway, I emailed his roommates in the early 2000s because that is how we all communicated.
I wanted to let them know we broke up, and they were always lovely to me then. They both admitted they knew about Meg and were the ones to demand that Jake tell me. That is when he broke up with the lame Isham. You do not understand any science excuse today. One of his roommates, a super nice guy named George, offered to help me get my things.
He had collected all my belongings from around the house and suggested I come up for weekend.
We did all the things Jake did not want to waste money on, and I said sure.
So I went up and George let me into the house while Jake was gone that day. I took photos of all his animals because while I might not be a PhD student then,
I paid attention and I knew he had an endangered species in his care at the house.
It was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a local rescue organization for his care.
And there was paperwork and a $25 fee he refused to submit to the local government. He refused to do it, saying he did not want the government in his business at all.
I took photos of that animal and all his breeding conditions for evidence of his major neglect.
I took a photo of an animal not allowed in the state, visible from the outside window. I then went out for a night on the town with George to have some fun.
We stumbled in early around midnight so Jake and Meg, who were watching television, would see me. I wore a short dress and George was practically carrying me past them in the living room. I spent the night in George's room, but he was a total gentleman the entire night.
The next morning, Jake said I did not have to act like that in front of him.
George beamed at me and planted a kiss on my head as Jake watched us with anger. I said have fun with my leftovers and walked out to start the next phase of revenge.
The next day, I had my photos developed and called the State Office of Fish and Wildlife.
I reported the animals in the house and the potential overcrowding of all his various breeding animals.
I reported the 2 animals he should not legally have in the state and asked for help.
Turns out Jake was not well liked by his peers or his roommates, but I certainly was.
George suggested they could submit complaints to the university about a teaching assistant sleeping with a student.
We made sure to tell the story to anyone they knew while we were out that night.
It was not a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was dating her.
They made sure people knew they had put in complaints sick of Jake and his entitled behavior. With my statement made and photos sent, and I called my friend Mary, who was Jake's advisor's wife.
She knew about the breakup, and I let her know, and he admitted he was sleeping with Meg.
I had been emailing him, and he admitted it in writing, so I sent that to Mary.
To say she was not happy was an understatement, and she told her husband while I was on.
Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later, George called me giddy to say wildlife officials were there.
State fish and wildlife officials were at the house confiscating several animals from the property that morning.
Meg was there and told officials, as far as she knew, all the animals were totally legal.
That put George and the other roommate in the clear regarding any responsibility for the illegal animals.
One animal was in the backyard, so it was implied to Jake that a neighbor had reported. While there, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic animal.
Since George was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate the house.
The animals were in communal areas, and the officers stayed for hours and returned with a warrant.
They returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Jake's room to investigate further. Meg apparently could not get a hold of Jake and eventually drove to the university to find.
The only animals they left behind were some guppies in a fish tank in the common area.
Now, PhD students need grant money, and animal studies funding often comes from the federal government directly.
Jake had just gotten an EPA grant right around when he broke up with me that year.
So I called the EPA and asked how I would report a person with a federal grant.
Long story short, he lost his grant and had to make restitution on what was already used.
He owed close to $30,000 and would never be able to get a grant again.
He avoided jail time since animals were healthy but lost all his breeding animals worth several thousands.
In the end, he owed a $15,000 fine, and the two animals went away forever.
For years, I would stop by if I was in the area to visit those specific animals.
The university revoked his scholarship and fired him from teaching for having an inappropriate relationship with student. He somehow escaped being expelled, but it always shocked me that he never tried to hide it. He did not even wait 4 weeks until she was done with his class to start dating.
It never fails to make me laugh, and after a few months, I emailed his sisters again.
I told them I missed them because Jake broke up after calling me fat and then cheating.
Shark, Jake is already clear you out. The tap.
The girls told me he said I broke up with him because of the long distance between.
I forwarded them emails Jake wrote about how he fell for Meg and was sorry about it.
Jake convinced his dad to pay for 1 more year so he could get a master's degree.
I stayed in contact with his siblings via email and social media, and largely let it go.
I got even and made friends, and Mary became like a very dear auntie to me.
I went on to get a master's degree myself and specialized in helping scientists communicate better.
I help doctors communicate their work to us dummies who cannot remember all the long scientific names.
Boston skaters. I work with museums and governments and travel a lot to learn cool things about our planet. And
I knew through his siblings that Jake and Meg got married and had 2 kids together eventually.
Meg dropped out of the sciences and became an accountant, while Jake went back to breeding animals.
Sups. Every once in a while, his siblings would tell me something, Paplins. But we had our own relationship. And
I sent a wedding gift for one of his sisters, and he complained loudly at the shower. He complained that his siblings were still my friends and did not embrace his now wife, Meg.
This is how his parents found out how their relationship started and ours ended 10 years later.
Jake never found out I was behind the reporting, and George is now a successful, tenured professor.
fast forward 20 years, and I was at a university giving a lecture to several hundred students.
I was mingling with students afterwards when I heard a familiar voice say, "Hey, long time see."
I realized it was Jake, and I did not change the expression on my face at all.
My instinct was to play dumb, and I said, "I am sorry. Have we met before somewhere?"
He looked incredulous and said, "It is me, Jake." But I told him I could not place.
Finally, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Jake, I guess I just blocked you out entirely."
I said, "Lovely to see you," and moved on quickly when he tried to reach and hug.
The department chair and faculty who invited me took me out to dinner that very same evening.
One of them asked if I knew Jake, and I said I did over 20 years ago.
She said he had been there for an interview, and they were likely going to hire him.
I said, "I am just shocked he is teaching after what happened at his previous university years ago."
They asked what happened, and I told them he was sleeping with a 19-year-old student.
He had to leave the program without a PhD because he could not afford to stay there.
The three people looked at each other and said, "Wow, we will have to look into that."
My friend Mary called me to say someone had called her doing a background check about Jake.
They pulled his old file, which included being fired, and the letters of complaint about his conduct.
Mary's name had been on it, with her husband listed as the faculty advisor on the record. As a bonus, it had a copy of his arrest record for the various illegal animals found.
His dad had paid for a lawyer to get the record expunged, but it still appeared there.
I do not think he is going to get that job, and I will return home content.
If someone complains about your looks, that is their problem to fix mentally, and not yours, ever. I might not have found out about Meg and turned his own wickedness back on himself finally.